Ichimon Japan is made possible in part by Patreon support. If you can afford to do so, and you would like to make sure that I can keep bringing you more content like Ichimon Japan and Japan Station, then please head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Signing up at the $1 a month level will get you access to bonus content, such as an entire full bonus episode of Ichimon Japan all about the movie Your Name, Kimi no Na wa. Ryan and I talk about that for about an hour. It's a pretty fun episode, and it is out now. Also, you get early access to all the podcast episodes, and if you join for $3 a month, then you're going to get access to Japanese Plus Alpha. That is a whole other podcast that I'm doing about the Japanese language, and I release those on a monthly basis. So again, japankyo.com/Patreon. And one last thing, if you sign up, you also don't have to listen to me ask you to join the Patreon every episode, because those episodes that I release on the Patreon, they don't have this long intro at the beginning, all right? So anyway, let's get to the show.
I like this. They thought they had confidence that she could speak Japanese well.
I guess so.
And they actually wanted 40,000 stamps.
I want to get back to that point.
You guys bought 40,000 stamps before?
I've only gotten up to 30,000, unfortunately. I haven't, not 40. Welcome to Ichimon Japan. I'm Tony and
I'm Ryan.
And today we're joined by a special guest. So someone who I think is going to be a great guest for this topic today. But let's introduce her first. So today we are joined by Kasha, who runs a very interesting website and company called Ikigai Connections. Hey, Kasha.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me today.
No, it's great to have you on. So Kasha has worked as an interpreter of Japanese, English, and Polish. Am I correct?
Yes, and I try to say that I wasn't like an official interpreter. It was me trying my darndest, and it worked nicely. So yeah. I mean, I've never worked as an interpreter professionally, but I've certainly been put in positions where I had to try my darndest as an interpreter. Yes.
It's just kind of like, can you do it? And like, Kocho Sensei, the principal, has to give a speech. You translate. It's like, oh, okay.
Yes.
And then you've also studied abroad too, right? I think you were in high school and university and graduate school in Japan, right?
That is correct. The first time I was there was in 1995.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Okay. So yeah, you've been there. You were there quite a while too, living there.
Yeah, I was there total about 8 years, and then I went back many times for business from Michigan. So yeah, definitely my heart is in Tokyo as well.
Awesome. And right now you are in the US, like you said, and could you explain a little bit of what Ikigai Connections is? Because I think some listeners, this may be relevant for them.
Sure. Basically, I created Ikigai Connections based on my own kuro, because I struggled so much with finding a job using my Japanese language skills. So there's a lot of people out there who are just obsessed with Japan, and I keep telling them, you absolutely can find a job if you try hard and you have connections and you network. And so I built this business. It's just turned 2 years old. And I basically have a blog where I provide lots of advice. I have online training programs, and I do lots of webinars and speeches and just helping people get the confidence and just kind of put their knowledge concisely in a resume and try to apply to get jobs where they can use their Nihongo regardless of which country they want to work in. So that's my Ikigai. And Ikigai, as I'm sure most of the listeners know, it means kind of like your passion, like thing you wake up to do. So that's my Ikigai for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time when I would think about, or when people would ask me like, what do you want to do? I'd go, I don't know, but I'd like to use Japanese in the job. So I think there's plenty of people like that. They want to keep in touch with Japan or Japanese in some way, even if they're not living in Japan, and ideally professionally, so yeah. It's ikigaiconnections.com, right? They can find that?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'll put the links, of course, at japankyo.com/Ichimon Japan in the show notes and all that. So if anybody wants to find out more. But so yeah, let's introduce the topic for today. So Ichimon means one question, and every episode we ask a question about Japan. So today's question is, do you have any funny or embarrassing Japanese language mistake stories? I'm sure all of us have, if you learn a language, you make mistakes. I mean, sometimes they're hilarious, right? Sometimes they're just, confusing. Regardless, we all make mistakes, and that's a perfectly normal part of learning a language, right? You have to make mistakes. If you're afraid to make mistakes, then you're probably not going to improve at the same rate that you would otherwise, right? It's totally okay to make mistakes and laugh at yourself. And so today, we're going to laugh at ourselves a little bit, and we're also going to laugh at a few interesting stories that I found online. So all of us have in some way or another studied Japanese for a very long time. All of us have been at this for, I don't know, like easily over 10 years, if not 20 years in some way or another. And so we all have our own little experiences learning the Japanese language. But I guess I'll start with mine, which happened relatively recently. So I guess I started studying Japanese over 20 years ago, although there were some gaps there. And nowadays I don't actually like do flashcards or anything like that. I just use Japanese in my daily, life, and I still end up learning things. But about 2 years ago, when I started working at the magazine where I work now, and that workplace is pretty much 100% Japanese. So I'm speaking in Japanese, and we're talking about an article that I'm going to be running in English about the city Nara, right? Nara with the big, big Buddha statue and the deer park, very scenic place, very famous place. And there's a travel article that we're going to run that's about Nara. And we're talking about, like, should this article go in this, or we're discussing something, and I'm speaking in Japanese. And then this just happened. I wasn't doing it on purpose. I don't know why, but I ended up saying Onara instead of Nara, right? And the publisher, who is a wonderful man, and I get along with him so great, and he's just a great, great guy, he just burst out laughing. He had he just kept laughing and laughing. And so let me explain what that means in case anyone is unaware. Nara is the city. Onara means to like fart. It's a fart, like flatulence, right? So it's a very funny mistake, right? Like, and what I ended up saying was like, there's this thing that you can add o to a lot of nouns that begin, like, for example, sushi can become osushi, or hashi can become ohashi, and that gives it this kind of like polite, nice sort of refined vibe, right? And so I ended up saying, well, you can't just add o to any word and have it sound nicer. So, we all ended up having a good laugh about that. But, that first moment when I said that, I was like, oh man, I just said something like, I never had that kind of embarrassing mistake. And that was funny how after like 20 years, it was that moment where I said, that silly thing.
I think it's wonderful that you are able to admit that, because people are so afraid to make mistakes, but we're constantly going to make them. So even after learning it for a decade or more, it still happens. So good for you for admitting that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in the past 3 or 4 years, this is the most fluent, the most like highest proficiency that I've ever had in Japanese. And yet that is when I make the most embarrassing mistake, right? So yeah, you're going to hear plenty of like silly mistakes like that today, whether it's from us or from the other stories that I found online. But how about we move on to Kasha, and then we'll go to Ryan afterwards. So Kasha, can you tell us about some interesting mistake that you made at some point?
Yes, mine was particularly mortifying. So I was at a summer camp with a bunch of college students. I was their English teacher. There was a few of us English teachers. So it was in the mountains. It was so beautiful. It was a whole like week or so. And it was all day English. So we as instructors, we were required.
All day Japanese?
No, all day in English. It was an English camp.
Oh, okay.
So I had to speak in English the entire time. However, this was in like the time that I was living in Japan. I really wanted to use my Nihongo every day, all day, but that was okay because this was my arubaito. This was just a part-time gig. I had to speak English all day, no problem. So I'm at this camp, and we had some time where we could go and just do our own thing. So it was basically free time. And during those free times, I allowed myself to speak in Japanese just a little bit with some people. So here I am. There's this, it was this game room. So it was closed off, and it was, you had like a Japanese shogi, you had, which is like chess. You had all sorts of like, it was kind of like a ping pong. It was like this game room, right? So I'm in there with this student. And I mean, again, I was a young-ish teacher, so it wasn't too big of an age difference, but he was this really tall, like, bigger Japanese guy. And he was teaching me how to learn Japanese chess or shogi. So we were in there for a while because I was really into it. And I kept asking him questions. And the whole time we're speaking in Japanese, which again, free time, I was allowed to do that. So free time is up. We have to get going to our next whatever meeting or meal or whatever. We get out of this game room and I had like 3 people looking for me. They're like, Kasha-san, where were you? We were looking for you. We have whatever message it was. I don't even remember because it wasn't even important. It's not even important right now. So I answer and I was kind of flustered because they just kind of like, they're not screaming, but they're kind of, loud voice. They're like, where were you? We're so nervous. And I said what I thought was, oh, I was being taught shogi. But what came out was a very wrong word, which I messed up the passive form of the Japanese. I said osowareta, which basically means I was attacked. And this student of mine is standing next to me. He's like a foot taller than I am, and he's much bigger. And he's like, no, 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 no. and everybody's looking at me. Their eyes became hugely wide. I'm like, what did I say? I'm like, shogi's so much fun. It's just like blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, 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 osowata. And I said osowareta. So after that, I paid special attention to the passive form of verbs, just so that it wouldn't sound like instead of being taught shogi, I was being attacked. So it sounds funny now, but like at the time, it was mortifying. And I was like, there was nothing going on.
This student attacked me.
The student attacked me. We're gone for 2 hours. I don't know what happened here. I come out with like, it's just very strange. So a smile on my face. Hey, it was fun. So yeah.
No, it's okay. It's okay. You don't understand. I was attacked. You're so calm.
Yeah, so that was definitely a little mortifying at the time, and they haven't let me forget about that. So, but definitely people learn your passive forms.
Yeah. Passive could be tricky at the beginning, and because I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, but I get the impression that in Japanese passives are used quite a bit more than in English. So you do have to make that kind of transition into getting used to using more passives than you would in English, first of all. And then you have the conjugation on top of that, right? So
and then you're constantly getting attacked, so that makes it hard.
And then you're constantly getting attacked, yeah.
Yes.
All right. Ryan, do you have something you could share with us?
I guess I can do 2 stories. One's from me, one's from my friend. Neither one of them are that interesting. I'll just warn you guys ahead of time. I do want to say, like, I have made lots of mistakes in Japanese. That's a normal thing. Like we said earlier, it's important to just, like, have the confidence or the bravery to try speaking and not be afraid of your mistakes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But most of my mistakes have just been, like, I forgot a word and just kind of, like, try to use a different word, or I pronounce it wrong, but it doesn't become a new word. It's just, like, a weird word. They're just like, what is that?
Yeah. That's happened to me. Yeah.
I think most mistakes end up in that category of just like they don't understand, but no one really bursts out laughing.
Yeah.
So this one's not even technically a mistake story, but I was in a group at an izakaya with other English teachers. I was the only like non-Japanese person, but they were sharing stories they had about messing up English that embarrassed them. So I think one I can remember is someone wanted to say election, but then they said erection.
Oh.
So they're like, are you excited for the next erection?
There's a little bit of a difference there.
Yeah.
But anyway, they were saying that. So then they're like, when it got to me, because we're like going in a circle, like, oh, but like you don't make mistakes in English. So like, tell us a Japanese thing you made a mistake. And I was like, well, I don't really have a funny story, but for whatever reason in my mind, I always confuse the 2 words yuenchi and yochien.
Oh.
Because they just feel very similar to me.
Right. Yuenchi means like amusement park. Yochien.
Like kindergarten?
Like kindergarten, nursery school. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's all I said is like, I just said I've always confused those 2 words. But for whatever reason, one of the teachers just like burst out laughing.
Yeah.
And like, and the weird thing is she continued laughing for like no joke more than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And like the other Japanese teachers are also kind of like looking at her like, it's not that funny. Are you okay?
Yeah. I think, like that kind of stuff does happen, and you just have to, I guess kind of have a thick skin about it because, I mean, that could very easily be like hurtful to the person that said that, right? Because, you feel kind of bad that somebody laughed at you. But, often you just kind of have to do your best to shrug it off because it is what it is, right? And it really, I think that's a perfectly common thing that people might get confused with anyway, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
At first, for me, I did feel a little bit embarrassed, but as it went on, I think it became an embarrassing story for her because it was one of those, like, she's in a public situation trying to stop laughing, but she can't.
Yeah.
And we were
went
all
on
like,
for too long.
yeah, it went on way too long. And we were like continuing like more people's stories, and she's still like giggling to herself. And we're like, are you okay? Do you need to like go to the bathroom or something?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was
That's
an
too
interesting
funny.
experience, though not really based on a mistake.
Right.
But another one is more based on disappointment, I guess. This happened to my best friend. So before I lived here, we both came together like just to do like a 3-week vacation and tour of Japan. And me and my friend both met in a Japanese class. And it was both of our times first experience coming to Japan. So we were very excited to come here and very excited to actually like use Japanese in real life for the first time. So we come out of the plane, go through immigration, all that, like get into the proper airport area, and we needed to figure out where like our shuttle bus is. And my friend was like, "Oh, I got this." And he like walked proudly over to the like information booth person and just like, "Eiga hanashimasu ka?" Which means, "Do you speak movie?" Because he wanted to say "eigo" but said "eiga." And he like realized it as he was saying it, and you could see like his face like just contort into shame, and the like lady look at him and be like, I can speak English.
Yeah, it's not good to be too confident. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Like similar words. I mean, kind of like what you mentioned earlier. Yeah, similar words often get jumbled up. I mean, and we're going to see this in some of those other stories. Yeah, it's tricky. I think like maybe one of the reasons why that teacher that kept laughing, well, I don't know, but I'm just going to say one thing is that sometimes I think, and this is perfectly normal, I mean, Japanese people tend to think of it more as the kanji rather than how it looks. I mean, or rather than how it sounds, right? So, although there's a lot of like playing with puns and all that in Japanese, but like maybe for her, because of the fact that the kanji are totally different and all this stuff, like it's extra funny to her. Whereas to us, maybe especially if you're not too familiar with the kanji, it just sounds funny or sounds similar, and that's where it ends for us. We don't have that base of thinking of it through the kanji.
That makes sense. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
There could be some of that, right? Like how preposterous that you would make that assumption that these two things are similar because the kanji are totally different. Come on, like
right.
Could be some of that too.
Yeah, I think it probably was. That's usually the response I get whenever I say like, "Oh, these words sound really similar." Like, "Oh, but the kanji's totally different." And it's like, yeah, but they sound very similar.
yeah, exactly. All right. So let's introduce one. So what I did was we don't have tons and tons of funny stories to entertain all these our wonderful listeners with. So I wanted to find some other, funny stories online. And of course, plenty of people share their own experiences learning Japanese online. And I found this one thread on Reddit where people shared a whole bunch of funny ones. So I picked a few, and I will include the link to the thread on Reddit just in case anybody wants to check out more of these in the show notes. Again, japankei.com/Ichimon Japan. But Ryan, would you mind reading the first story, and then we'll kind of break it down and explain, anything that needs to be explained after we go through it?
Okay, so I believe our first one says, "When I first started learning, I was trying to tell the shop clerk, 'Thank you.' I tried to speak, but first came Spanish, then Russian, before finally settling on Japanese. The employee gave a shy little giggle at me. I'm not good at reading."
So, this one isn't like burst out loud hilarious or anything, but I think it's interesting in that I was curious to see if Kasia has had any sort of similar experience, being that she also speaks Polish. I also speak Spanish. Ryan also has studied Spanish, speaks quite well. So I wanted to go through like all our experience, but let's start with Kasia. Have you ever had any sort of similar experience like that?
Absolutely, because I was born and raised with Polish, but then when I went to kindergarten, I started learning English. So English became my main language. And then in high school, I started learning Japanese. So I started focusing more on Japanese. And then when I lived in Poland for a couple years, and there it was fine. It was just because I use all three languages in my job. it was just everyday headache and messed up and stuff. But then I went to Italy for a year, and I just wanted to learn the basic Italian, just the numbers and the days of the week and hello and thank you. But no matter what I did, Japanese always came out. And it was just so strange because Japanese and Italian don't sound at all alike. If anything, Polish should have come out. But for some reason, when I tried to say like mokuyobi or mercoledì, I think is Thursday, I would just come out with mokuyobi, and it started with M. So for some reason, Thursday came out in Japanese. So I absolutely can relate with this. And it's really interesting that it happens to so many people.
Yeah, definitely.
This actually happened to me too, but like the other way.
Uh-huh.
So when I was still in university, I was working at like a sporting goods store, and occasionally we would have Spanish-speaking customers. And because I could like a little do Spanish, if we had no one else around, I would help them. And Japanese would come out on accident. Like they asked me if I had shoes, and like, okay, I'll go check. And I come back, I was like, nai desu. No, I.
Yeah, there are some similarities in the sound, and like no I kind of sounds like nai too. So yeah, definitely. Like I've been in situations where I'm translating, or I guess like kind of interpreting for from a Japanese speaker to a Spanish speaker, but the Spanish speaker was my mom, and normally I speak to her in Spanish, but because I was doing this in front of the Japanese speaker who also understands English, I was interpreting into English. However, because I normally speak to her in Spanish, like that was unnatural for me. So then there was like this one like layer going on there, and then there were like moments where I would just start speaking to my mom in Japanese, and then like I'd get through like one sentence, and then I'd realize, oh wait, I'm speaking in Japanese there.
That's too funny.
Yeah, like I'm dealing with like one speaker that can speak both Japanese and English, and one speaker that can speak both Spanish and English. So that's like, okay, what language? It's so confusing.
I've had something like that too. So my story in Japan is I lived in Japan 4 years. I went to Hawaii for graduate school, then I came back to Japan. Yeah. And I have a Spanish teacher who I used to meet with in person when I lived in Osaka, but now we meet online because I live farther away. But when I first came back to where I live now, I like took a train down to Osaka just to meet up with him again and say like, oh, long time no see and all that stuff. Yeah. So I met up with him in the afternoon. We kind of just like hung out touring Osaka, doing fun stuff or whatever, using Spanish the entire afternoon. And then the evening, his wife came to meet us for dinner, and she's monolingual Japanese. So it was the first time that he was speaking with me entirely in Spanish, and then she would speak with me entirely in Japanese, and I was kind of like switching back and forth. And it just made my head explode. Like my head has like Spanish mode and Japanese mode, and it does not like to switch back and forth between them like on a dime. It was just like, wait, what?
Have you guys ever had like a moment where you're trying to remember a word in one language, but you can't remember it in that language, and you end up remembering it in another language?
Yes, and recently it's English that I keep forgetting.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. There's been times where like, oh, I can only remember the Spanish and the Japanese. I can't remember the English.
That is too funny. When I was going to graduate school in Japan, I gave up on, it took too long to listen in Japanese and try to translate in my brain into English and write the notes in English. So I was forced to just listen in Japanese and write in Japanese and try to speak in Japanese. And I had to cut out the English. So when my friends at home would ask me, what are you studying? What are you doing? I was like, I can't even explain this in English. And English is my native language. But it just, I'm so used to talking about it only in Japanese that, hold on, let me look it up in the dictionary. Like,
I've had exactly that, like certain phrases that you just get used to using, and you want to use them in English or Spanish or whatever, but like they don't exist. You're like, I want to say this, but I don't know how.
yappari. Yappari is the best word ever.
Yeah. There's plenty of those. And then there's like, specialized words that we've talked about it briefly on this podcast. I think it was the fake kanji episode where we were talking about like fish vocabulary, right? Where you learn like a bunch of fish names in Japanese and you have no idea what they are in English.
Yes.
So, in English, it's just like fish. Other fish.
It's all fish.
It's all fish, yeah. It's like maybe sweetwater versus ocean. Maybe that's about it.
Well, then it's just freshwater, saltwater.
Yeah.
That's too funny. I just remember going to a kaiten sushi with the, sashimi and sushi plates coming around on the conveyor belt, and they're telling me all, I know that the left side of the kanji is fish, right? But then the right side is always different. And I'm like, they're all fish to me. I've never thought maybe tuna and salmon, but then the rest are all fish. But maybe it's because I'm from Michigan and we don't really have that many, that much variety in fish, but I love kanji.
Yeah.
I'm surprised how well people know it. Like, I understand if you work at the restaurant or you're a fisherman, but my students know them all. And it's like, why?
Yeah, it's just part of daily life, I guess. You just learn it by just being around it all the time.
I guess. Yeah. I've been around it for 8 years now and I don't know them.
Well, I know which ones I like. So.
Right.
Anyway, all right. So let's take a break here and then we'll come back with a whole bunch of really silly mistakes. Hey, Tony here. So I got a couple quick announcements and then we'll get back into the second half of the show. First of all, if you haven't yet, go check out kimitodesigns.com. That is KIMITO designs.com. I just released a couple new embroidered beanies with some original artwork on there. I got one for myself and I really like it, but being that I live in Hawaii, I won't really have many opportunities to use it until I travel outside of Hawaii. So I'm looking forward to going somewhere that's cold enough to actually wear a knit beanie. But again, go check out the stuff there. Anything you purchase there ends up supporting what I'm doing here. So if you can't join the Patreon, maybe you want to pick up a shirt or a beanie or something, you can do that at kimitodesigns.com. Also, go check out episode 53 of Japan Station. My guest for that episode is Kofi Bizel-Smith. He goes by the name Kofi Manga on YouTube and Instagram, and he is a manga creator and boxer and just an all-around really nice, hardworking guy. I love his story. It's the kind of story that's just going to motivate you to do whatever you've been meaning to do, to work on that project, to write that novel. So go check out Kofi Manga over on episode 53 of Japan Station at japanstationpodcast.com. And just a reminder, if you want to make sure that you don't miss any episodes of Ichimon Japan, plus support the show, subscribe. That is the number one thing you can do to support the show that doesn't cost you any money. So again, subscribe, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts. I know for a fact that does help boost the rankings. So again, subscribe. And if you have any questions, send them over to ichimon@japankyo.com. Ryan and I would love to take a look at your questions. You can also record something and just attach it to the email. We'd love to hear your voice and play it on the show and try to address whatever question it is that you have. All right. So let's get back into the show because we have quite a few more stories for you. All right. So let's share one more of ours before we get into those more of those Reddit stories. So Kasha, would you mind sharing another interesting mistake that you made?
Sure. This one was I came back to Japan after my high school and college years. So my Japanese at this point was okay. I hadn't been to grad school yet. It was just beginning, and I'm just came back to Japan and I'm trying it out, and I met up with my friends again. So this is late 90s also, and I don't know how you feel about this, but to me it felt like there were just a little bit less gaikokujin foreigners in Japan.
I'm sure there
so
were,
with my long blonde hair, I felt like I stood out.
I'm sure
definitely,
you did.
Whatever you did, it was less. So I'm here with my friends, and it was like 4 or 5 of us, and I'm the only non-Japanese person. We're at an izakaya. We're having fun. We're about to leave. We're just waiting for our checks to come, and my friends are like, "Hey, Kasha, you should look at that table next to us and go tell them gochiso-sama." And I was like, "Oh, I don't get why I would do that, but okay, maybe it's like a thing that I have to do." So I literally stood up as we were leaving and I told the people next to us, "Gochiso-sama deshita." And the whole izakaya section burst into laughter because basically I was telling them, "Thanks for picking up our bill."
Oh, okay.
And my friends were getting a kick out of it because they're like, "Yeah, we'll let the foreigner say something funny to these 4 salarymen next to us." And the salarymen were at this point, their faces are red, they're kind of tipsy, and they're just laughing because they've never seen they never saw a foreigner before speak Japanese to them directly. Yeah. But it was like I was in this moment. It was like the longest 5 minutes of my life where I felt like everybody in the izakaya was just laughing at me, maybe not with me, but it was just, I wasn't sure what joke I was a part of. But then afterwards, they explained to me, oh, the reason it was funny was because you basically said, hey, thanks for picking up our bill. And I didn't understand that aspect, but I definitely learned what that meant after that. So it was a good lesson.
Yes.
That was just mean. You were just set up.
I know.
The thing about mistakes is you definitely learn the lesson when you do make a mistake like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And really, that wasn't so much your mistake as like, you getting set up. But, well, I guess you learned it. But that is there's so much like meaning in what you just explained there. Like that's pragmatics, right? Like how we actually use language versus like the meaning, how it's translated. So of course, most people, I think, that even study Japanese for, I don't know, a couple weeks, they just chapter 1 in the book, they're going to see, itadakimasu is what you say before you eat a meal. And gochisou-sama deshita is what you say when the meal ends. And what would they typically translate that in in the textbook? Like, thanks for the meal or something?
I think it is like thanks for the meal.
Yeah.
Yeah. But literally, gochiso is like a treat or something like that. Like a feast or, something along those lines. And deshita is giving it the past tense. So you are implying there, your gratitude for them having given you this fantastic meal, and thus the meaning gets across that it's like, oh, thanks for paying for that, right?
Right. But then if you twist the nuance just a little bit, and if I was facing the owner of the izakaya, like the mama-san or whoever behind the bar, if I told them "Gochisou-sama deshita,"
that's totally fine.
That would be fine because I'm basically thanking them for the meal.
Yeah. You are saying it was a great meal, but you are not implying that you're not going to pay.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
So I guess it's like thanks for providing the meal, which makes sense to the chef and owner, but to another customer, it sounds like you're asking for money.
Yeah, thanks for the great meal, or thanks for putting forth the great meal, or something like that.
Yes.
So it goes back to, I've said this I'm sure many times by now, but like it's not a one-to-one translation kind of thing, right? It's
Correct.
all like, it can seem overwhelming, but you learn the nuances of it the more you use it, and sometimes you make mistakes, and that's just how it is.
And sometimes you're tricked into mistakes.
Sometimes your friends will play a little prank on you. Yeah. Oh, that is a great story. All right, so let's get back into those Reddit stories. Kasha, would you mind reading another one of those, the next one, I guess?
Sure. So this one reads like this. Over the summer, I had a host family while I studied abroad, and my host dad literally only ever asked me 3 questions. Are you hungry? It's delicious, isn't it? And would you like more? This man loves to eat, and I loved it. But anyways, once he was offering me a 3rd helping of dessert, and I couldn't contain another bite. So in my muddled state of having the itis, I said, "Onaka ga oppai," instead of "Onaka ga ippai." That's the difference between stomach boobs and I'm full. My host parents and host sister laughed at me for days following that. Now that's embarrassing.
Yeah. But yeah. There's another one that I think in the thing she says something like she'll never forget that, or maybe that was a different one, but I'm sure she never forgot that.
No.
So
she ate so much she grew stomach boobs.
Stomach boobs. So let's clear it up just in case. So ippai means like a lot or full in this context that she was trying to use it in. Oppai means breasts. And then onaka ga ippai is how you would say that you are full, that you have eaten to the point where you just can't eat anymore. And so she got onaka ga ippai mixed up with a phrase that doesn't normally exist, onaka ga oppai, which is saying that like my stomach is boobs. You could translate it as that. So that is pretty funny, and I'm sure they got a real kick out of that. Mm-hmm. But thankfully I have not mixed those two up ever.
Not yet.
Not yet. Sometimes it's like that. When they tell you not to do something, immediately you can't help but do it. Now it's stuck in my head, and I'm going to make that mistake like very soon.
Onaka ga oppai.
Don't say onaka ga oppai. Don't say onaka ga oppai. How are you full? Onaka ga oppai. It's going to happen. All right. Ryan, how about you read us the next one then?
Okay, so the next one says, when I went to my local post office for some stamps, I studied very carefully how to say it, and walked in proudly asking for 4만 kite onegai shimasu. The staff freaked out. The lady I was talking to went back and asked for someone else. They both came back. They start looking in drawers and discussing, and finally one of them musters the courage to tell me, not many, not many. I finally smacked myself in the head and said, Yonmai. To this day, I'm amazed they thought I actually wanted 40,000 stamps rather than thinking I effed up my Japanese.
I was
love
laughing.
this one.
Yeah, I was laughing out loud when I read this one. I love it.
I mean, it really is truly beautiful that they did not confirm that they actually wanted, like, the lady could have written it down 40,000 stamps instead of 4.
Yes.
But they really believed the Yonman part
I
of
like
that.
this. They thought they had confidence that she could speak Japanese well.
I guess so.
And they actually wanted 40,000 stamps.
I want to get back to
You
that
guys
point.
bought 40,000 stamps before?
I've only gotten up to 30,000. Unfortunately, I haven't. Yeah, not 40.
Oh man, I've gotten up to 60.
Oh geez, what are you sending?
Well, maybe
maybe-
Nengajo or something, right?
Like the New Year's postcards. Yeah, they did send a lot of.
Man, I
them
just send
sometimes.
boxes of stamps to people.
No, just one really, really heavy box. That's what you're sending.
It's like an elephant. I just stick a bunch of them on the side. Take me to the zoo.
Yes. That'll be 40,000 stamps, please.
So yeah, Yonman is 40,000. Yonmai is 4 thin paper things.
Exactly, yeah. So in Japanese, you use like little counter suffixes a lot of times to, depending on, what you're talking about. In this case, we're talking about stamps. For flat, usually papery kind of things, you use the counter mai. And so ichimai would be one of those things. Nimai would be 2 of those things. Sammai would be 3 of those things. Yonmai would be 4 of those things, in this case, stamps. So yonmai kind of sounds like yonman, right? There's only one syllable there that's different. It's not syllable, but
one
anyway,
sound.
One sound that's different there. And so you can understand how someone would make this mistake, because this person just memorized it. They didn't have a fundamental understanding of each portion of meaning in that thing that they were saying. But as I was saying, really practiced it, seemed like they were confident, just like your friend Ryan, and then that thing comes out, right? But
So next time you go in asking for stamps, Tony, you're going to say, Yonman oppai onegai shimasu.
Oh my god, no. Hopefully they will confirm in that case. Like, I think you mean something else. Please repeat. But have you guys ever had that experience where you clearly say something strange or weird, and like the person you're talking to doesn't confirm? Like, they just kind of either assume or like they kind of ignore it? Because I think I've had cases like that where I wish, like, why don't you confirm what I just said? Like, I clearly said something wrong, but they just kind of ignore it or something. I feel like that happens fairly common, like in this case where, I mean, who the heck is buying 40,000 stamps, right?
Right.
And yet they just freak out and they don't know what to do.
Yeah, it's really weird because like they have such a habit, especially at like sales locations, of writing everything down on a calculator so you can see like the number.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think they would just write like 40,000 and be like, "ii desu ka?" or something.
Yeah.
Right.
I think so. Yeah, I've had that plenty of times where they'll write it on the calculator and then show it to you, right? And
In case they do that to you, listener, they do that to Japanese people too. It's not just a
Yeah.
insecurity of your Japanese
point.
thing.
Yeah.
Because I
So
thought that when I
happens,
first
right?
saw it, I was like, I understand you. Why are you writing it down?
Yeah. So that happens. I just, it's weird that this clerk just freaked out rather than just, 1 second, did you say yomai or like yoman, or do you mean like, no confirmation there, but anyway.
And the hardest part about all of this is that depending on what you're asking for,
Yeah.
the counter is going to be different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like you were talking, for the thin papery stuff, like a stamp or maybe pieces of paper, then you're going to use my. But then if you're going to use like, I don't know, beer, okay, you're at izakaya, you're getting beer, and you want your second one, that's hai, right? But then also those letters are going to change depending on the number. So ippai, nihai, sambai, yonbai, yonhai.
Yohai, yeah.
So like that's so confusing when you're learning Japanese.
Yes.
But my words of advice to everybody: don't worry about it too much. Sometimes you can even use your fingers and just say,
Absolutely.
yon onegai shimasu. And people are going to be fine with that.
Yeah,
or if you can
absolutely.
get the basics like hitotsu, futatsu, mitsu, just like one of something, then people are going to be absolutely fine because you're not going to remember that the counter for rabbit is piki and the counter for
The
dog
counter for rabbit
is
is
something else.
wa.
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah,
Wow, you're
right.
right. Ichiwa ni wa.
rabbit is an extra weird one. So I love that you brought that up because rabbit is
Japanese mistake while making the Japanese mistake episode.
yeah. No, but rabbit, that's a perfect example of like you would
That one's
never-
a weird one.
Somebody has to specifically tell you that rabbit does not follow the pattern, and you're proving your point and bringing up that example. It's
I think no one would bat an eye at that mistake though, because everyone's aware it's weird that rabbit has their own counter.
yeah, even Japanese like wonder at that one. Yeah,
Like, what makes rabbits that special to have their own counter? Like,
yeah, exactly. And there's so many of these like even like obscure ones that many Japanese people don't get right. So don't freak out. It's just fine. Like in the case of the stamps, I think it's totally fine, and it would have gotten the meaning across if the person would have just said "4万kite onegaishimasu."
Yeah.
Right? No counter, just number, and then the word for stamp, and done.
I mean, that's what they did say is 4万kite onegaishimasu.
Oh, they did say it? Okay. There you go. Yeah. So they fixed it in the end without technically.
Well, they should have said
being
4
correct.
mai kite onegaishimasu.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that was the mistake, but the meaning got across, which I guess proves my point to be.
But you could just say 4 kite onegaishimasu or kite 4.
Yeah. Exactly. So, yes, Kasha, totally. I think that is one of those things where, like, when you get to that chapter in the textbook, you go like, "Oh my god, I have to learn all of these."
Yeah.
Oh no.
don't
but
even worry about it. And,
you figure it
sometimes
out.
you'll just pick it up.
Yeah.
You'll get so used to ordering however many plates of something or however many sticks of yakitori, and you'll just pick up on these things in the context of your friendships, your karaoke sessions, your school things. So don't worry about memorizing these things.
Yeah. And it's whether it's a mistake or not, it's so much easier when you learn it in context.
Yes.
I know I've said it many times before, but when you learn, like sometimes I have these like vague memories of like learning a specific word when I was sitting at the dotor in like Kobe station with my friend, blah, 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 right? Like these very specific memories of this moment where I learned a certain word or usage where like, I don't know why it's so specific when I have like generally a bad meaning, bad memory for a lot of other stuff, but for very specific things like that, I don't know why it works like that. I guess because you make many connections in the brain and then it just stays longer in there.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Since we're on this counter topic though, I want to ask you two if you've ever had this. So like at a restaurant I go to, whatever counter I order in, they always switch it. And I'm wondering if that happens to anyone else.
Switch
so, like,
it in like,
So like I ordered something and I wanted 3 of them. So I said Mitsu. And when he read it back, he said, okay, Sanko. So in my head, I was like, okay, it must be Sanko and not Mitsu. So the next time I came there, I was like, okay, I want this Sanko. And it's like, okay, Mitsu. And it's like, wait, what? And like, no matter what counter I use, like the waiter dude will always repeat it back with the other counter.
That is too funny.
Maybe that is just like showing, I'm just total benefit of the doubt here, but that might be a listening kind of showing that you're listening in that you're not just repeating it mindlessly, but you're actually showing that you're understanding enough to be able to change it in that way.
Okay, this gives me an idea. Next time, I'm going to order a whole bunch of individual things, and then it's going to be like something hitotsu, something ikko, something hitotsu, something ikko.
Yes.
Oh, you're just messing with this guy.
And I'll like have a notepad, like which ones does he repeat and which ones does he switch.
That's awesome.
That would be an interesting experiment.
Well, there's, I remember, and I don't know if it's still the case, but when I lived in Japan X number of years ago, we would always talk about how the wording that people were using at the convenience stores was technically incorrect. And they should have been using different Japanese.
Yeah, that
and
happens.
then I would go to the convenience store and I would always be like, are they going to say it right? Are they going to say it correctly? And I just would always go back to my friends in school and we'd be like, this convenience store during the day, their teins-san, their clerks seem to be okay. But then the other one, they try to use too much keigo and it's actually incorrect. So maybe they're just, I don't know, going above and beyond to pretend to be more correct or something. Who knows? I don't know.
But overcompensating.
Overcompensating?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. or I mean, one last thing that I'll add into this is there are very specific honorific words that are used in the service industry that are only supposed to be used for the service industry workers. For example, ohiya, right? Which is the word for cold water. In a restaurant, you would hear that word used. But my understanding is that word is supposed to be only used by the service industry worker, like the waiter, waitress. But you hear plenty of the customers using that word too. So I think it's gotten to the point where it doesn't really matter anymore. But the original intention behind some of those words was that the people working at the restaurant are the ones that are supposed to use those. So just interesting how things change and, with all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's plenty of those words that are, I think, very, very interesting.
Yeah, people do just learn what they hear, though, because my old school, when I lived in Osaka, my new school is much more casual. So, like, when students talk to teachers, it's usually just like normal Japanese. Yeah. But the old school, especially if they came to the teacher's office, they would try to encourage the students to use kenjogo, which is like the humble Japanese. Yeah, right. And the partner is keigo, which is like the honorific Japanese. And to help with that, usually when you're speaking about yourself, you use the humble form, and when you're speaking to someone else, you use the honorific form. And so the teachers, if they ask for a teacher and the teacher's not there in the humble form, they would say the teacher's not here to like be different or whatever. But because the students always heard the humble form, they would like just start asking that way instead of asking in the like honorific form. And so the teacher's like, no, you can't say that to me. I say that to you. Yeah. And these are like 10-year-old kids. They're just like, oh, huh?
Yeah. No, excellent point in that, when Japanese people enter the workforce, a lot of times they have to learn proper honorific language because, I mean, what you're showing is like a classic case of like language acquisition at the childhood level where you're just kind of mimicking what you're hearing. And then through being corrected, you end up learning how it's supposed to be used. But that system is rather complicated, so it doesn't really, you don't learn it 100% just by a few corrections here and there. You actually have to like sit down and memorize it.
Yeah, even like in the business world, if you're talking to your boss, you're going to be, when you talk to your boss, you're going to elevate your boss above you, right? So it's, shacho-san, irashaimasu ka? So like kind of very polite. But if I'm talking to a customer about my boss, I'm not going to say that my boss is irashaimasu. I'm going to say that he's there, but he's not that polite because obviously the customer is higher than my boss. So when you start learning that, it kind of messes with your head. But again, I always tell people, don't worry about it. It's okay. You start picking up on it after a while. It gets to become a little bit more natural. But when you think about it too much, it really messes with your mind. So don't like overthink it. Yeah. It can be very confusing.
No, you learn the broad strokes and then you refine it little by little. I mean,
yes,
that's
exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
And like we said, the Japanese natives also have trouble with this. When I worked in Eikaiwa, which is more like a private business thing, our manager actually had a cheat sheet like glued to the phone that was like what honorific terms to use when a customer called.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah, definitely. And you, just like you would hear like in English, like, oh, young people don't know how to talk these days. You hear plenty of Japanese older people saying, young people don't know how to speak properly to older people. Yeah, you hear plenty of that. That's just, it's like, no matter what the language, I'm sure you hear older people complain about younger people.
Exactly.
That's just how it is.
It's the global universal. The elderly hate the young.
Yeah. All right.
And parents just don't understand.
Parents just don't get it, man. Yeah. Anyway, so who was the next person?
I think
was it Ryan?
I'm next?
Yeah, I think it was you.
Okay, so the next one was, I was practicing a speech for a Japanese contest, and it was about how I met my husband. My parents had a role arranging it, so I wanted to mention that. While practicing, instead of saying, Oya ni kimete moraimasu, my parents chose for me, I kept on saying, Oya ni kimete moraimasu, my landlord chose for me. It took quite a bit of practice to stop saying that.
Yes.
So, Oya is parents or parent, and then Oya, usually you would hear Oya-san is landlord, but it certainly seems plausible that a landlord would introduce you to your future husband. I mean,
it's completely possible.
That's not outlandish. So if you're just listening to that, you very well could just understand the whole story like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, this reminds me of a story I'll tell after this one.
Oh, okay.
But I do want to say, one of the things that I think throws off English speakers learning Japanese is that the length of vowels is very important. Definitely. So like, Yuki is snow, but Yuki is bravery.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what frustrates me is that because they teach English not ideally, they teach them that like long vowels matters in English too, even though it doesn't.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah, so like
in your junior high?
in all of them I've ever been to. Mm-hmm. Like so English has more vowel sounds than Japanese. So for example, E and I are different sounds.
Yeah.
But when they teach them English through like katakana pronunciation, because they can't make a different sound, they just make like one will like, for example, it versus eat. One will be a short vowel, one will be a long vowel, and they teach them like that's the difference.
Yeah.
And they have to be like, no, that's not the difference. It's a different sound.
Yeah. That's just trying to katakana-ize the sound, but that's not going to sound the same. It's kind of like how when you have words that end in R, a lot of times you end up in katakana like just with a long A sound, so like a ka or something like that. But it's like, no, maybe for British English where they drop the R's, I guess.
The best example I always use is like Thursday becomes Sazday.
Yeah. Which sounds almost like SARS Day. It's like, it's not a good day. But long vowels are definitely confusing. And I still, I don't get that right 100% of the time. I sometimes have to check, like, was this long or not? It still happens to me. And that's just one of those tricky things because in English we don't have that distinction. So we're more prone to getting that mixed up.
And I hate to say it, but the story I was going to tell, I completely forgot while telling that other story.
Oh, no.
Well, I'm like reading the paragraph again, like, what was it? Something about a landlord.
Well, if you remember the whatever it is, then jump in later. But we can move on to the next one.
All right.
Yeah.
I was meeting my girlfriend's parents, who are Japanese and don't speak any English, for the first time. Because they lived in the countryside, they invited us to go and stay there for the weekend. We arrived at the house, and being the middle of winter, we were wearing jackets and scarves, etc. As we went inside, we did introductions and whatnot, and then my girlfriend said she was hot as the house was well heated. I turned to her and, well, what I wanted to say was, じゃあ、上着を脱いでください, which means, then take off your jacket, please. But what I actually said was, じゃあ、下着を脱いでください, which means, then take off your underwear, please. So here we are, four of us standing in the entrance, and then all of a sudden her parents burst out laughing and her dad went and grabbed me a beer. All has been good since. Well, that's embarrassing.
That.
Yeah, that's the most embarrassing because right in front of their parents too.
Yeah. I love that story. So yeah, this is another one of those, like, the two words kind of sound the same, and like a lot of times
this one I think he actually was thinking in kanji.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, often you learn things in pairs too, like, because uwagi, you write it like up
clothes,
and then thing you wear, right? And then shitagi, you write it with down and then thing that you wear. So like it, in a way, they look like they would be homonyms. And I guess you could make the argument that a coat is the opposite of underwear, although that sounds very strange when you say that. But it makes total sense how you would get those mixed up in your head, right? But I love that story.
Oh, that's meeting your, whether it's, I don't know if it's future in-laws or not, but from this situation, I got the understanding that they're having a nice relationship now. But the very first time you meet them, to burst out with that at the Genkan at the beginning, at the entrance, oh my gosh. What a great first impression.
Yeah, and it seems like the dad loved it because he got him a beer and yeah. No, it's a great story. But yeah, those moments where you kind of get, nervous or kind of, you're not totally relaxed, that's when those kind of things just blurt out sometimes. So totally normal. Ryan, if you don't remember that other one that you were thinking of, I do have one that wasn't mine, but was of a Japanese teacher that I know that she told me one.
I thought of a different one that's related, but I don't know if it's as good.
Okay.
So I had a friend who studied Japanese, and he grew up, he was Chinese American. He grew up in an area with like a lot of Chinese American people. Mm-hmm. And I guess in Chinese, the kanji for landlord means family. So him and his entire class just assumed it meant family, and like for a long time we're using it like that. And the teacher kept being like, you guys are really close with your landlords or something.
Oh, interesting.
I love that. Yeah, that's a whole other layer of like, especially Chinese speakers who learn kanji. They know it. some kanji mean totally different things in Japan.
Yeah, the most famous one is the kanji for letter, tegami, in Chinese, apparently. I don't speak Chinese, so
Me either,
forgive
but
me
I
if
know
I'm
this
wrong.
one.
I'm just, what other people told me, means toilet paper.
Yeah.
Oh.
So they're like, I sent my mother a toilet paper.
Yeah. Because tegami, literally, the kanji is hand paper, right? So, yeah, I mean, I can see how that could mean toilet paper.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
But yeah, that's a very famous one. Yeah, I've heard that one a few times. Yeah. That would be interesting to talk to somebody who grew up, speaking Chinese with, knowing kanji like that. The other one that I heard from a Japanese teacher here who works in Hawaii, she told me that one time this was for a high school student learning Japanese, and the student was supposed to say something like, これは先生のゴミ箱ですか? Something like that. So is this the teacher's trash can? But instead, the student wrote, 先生はゴミ箱ですか? Right? So, which can be translated as, is the teacher or are you a trash can? Right? So, so I love that one. I love that. It's so funny. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Japanese teachers, they must have so many stories like that because, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah,
I
when
love
you're
it.
teaching like 150 students every year, you must get some pretty wacky mistakes.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's like you were saying in your previous examples, I just think it's important that we are okay with making mistakes.
Yes.
Because if you're not okay with it, then you're just not going to say things out loud and you're not going to have time to practice.
Yep.
Practice makes perfect and mistakes are a part of it. And they'll make your relationships that much stronger, just like the uwagi and shitagi that we just talked about.
Yeah.
See, two things I want to add to
memory.
that. If you make the mistake like this, you will never make it again because you'll remember it forever.
Yes.
And second, because I teach Japanese students now, most of their grade is based on their writing and reading ability. So the other teachers think is really good at English are often the really shy ones who don't speak. But the so-so writing and reading ones often aren't afraid of making mistakes. So my speaking grades for them is often way higher than the advanced students. I'm using air quotes.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a weird meandering way to say it. But yeah, don't be afraid. Just talk. Even if your other abilities aren't good, if you're not afraid to talk, people will assume you're better than the other people. Yeah,
you know what happens? I think I've talked to many Japanese people about why. I mean, oftentimes they bring this up. I don't even ask them about this, but they'll start talking about why they think Japanese people are not good at English. And one thing is they're too scared to make mistakes, or because the system emphasizes writing so much, you get used to the pattern of having to get things right in every single sentence instead of just getting what you want to say across, which may not be pretty, but if you can do it, then really that's all that matters, right?
Natural spoken language in any language is not perfect. People have incomplete thoughts or meandering sentences.
Yeah.
So even if you're making small mistakes, they might sound perfectly natural because that's just what language sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know about you guys, but when I spent so long in Japan and I came back home to America, I made so many mistakes in English because I wasn't, I wasn't used to the current pop culture or the movies and the new phrases and the comedy. And I came back and I'm like, what is this new language that people are talking about in English? So, you get so used to, at least for me, I was trying so hard to learn Japanese that when I came back home, I missed about 8 years worth of American life. So that's a lot of your own language that you're kind of missing out on. And then I would make mistakes because I'd try to say something that had some kind of funky pop reference and no, it didn't come off so easily or as well as I thought it would. So language is just something that you learn, you grow. It's a never ending thing. And how fun is that?
Yeah, that's awesome. There's always new things to learn. Yeah.
My English is becoming more like Japanese English because I'm surrounded by it, and mistakes that initially sounded horrible now don't sound so bad.
Yes.
I got many homeworks tonight. Wait a minute, I shouldn't say that.
Did you do all your homeworks, Ryan?
Yeah.
So, if any of the listeners have any, fun mistakes they would like to share, I'd love to, read those. So, you can email us at ichimon@japankyo.com. I'll have Ryan read them on the show.
Oh, great. I'm so great at Reading aloud, if all recorded.
Yes. But Kasia, thank you so much. Again, it's ikigaiconnections.com, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. So for anybody that's interested in maybe finding some job or something related to Japan or using the Japanese language, great resource to go check out. And I will include the links in the show notes as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you. Any Kasia, anything else? Ryan, anything else? Are we good?
I think we're good. This was fun. Thanks for sharing your stories.
Thank you for sharing your words and for, not being attacked. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Be careful out there.
Yeah, be careful, everybody. Don't
that shogi, man, that Japanese chess.
Yeah.
Shogi's a violent sport.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks, guys. See you next time.
Thank you.
See ya.